I'm in some woods. Might be wondering why. We'll get to that. Do you ever wonder, particularly in the age of AI, whether we're building the right things? It's quicker than ever to get stuff into the hands of customers. We're not always questioning whether we should. Knowing the right things to build and when is at the heart of giving you or your organisation competitive advantage. That is strategy. I'm Tom Pryor, host of a new DMBA podcast called In Practice. Strategy is one of those things we're often not formally taught as designers. So when I come across a tool or a framework that brings strategy to life in a practical way, I love to share it. In today's episode of In Practice, we're going to get into one that uses the metaphor of nature to bring strategy to life. The framework we're going to go through is called the Shredder. It was created and refined by Avi Ashkenazi. Avi is Director of Product Design at Deel. He created the Shredder to help his teams get to the heart of competitive strategies so that they can make better decisions to strengthen their own. In the Shredder, a company is a tree. The fruits, that's its products, the soil, the atmosphere, that all goes towards making it grow. But the bit we can see the outside but not the inside of, that's the strategy, that's the trunk. And today, Avi's going to take us through his framework for understanding why these things matter, how to uncover them, and how getting to the root, no pun intended, of competitive strategy helps us make better decisions as designers and teams. Let's get back inside and get into it. Avi, welcome to In Practice. Fantastic to have you here. How are you doing today?
I'm very good. Nice to see you here.
Yes, wonderful to have you here. Very excited to get into today's In Practice topic, framework, tool. So I'm going to pass straight over to you and say, what is it that you're going to share with us today? Why is it valuable? And why should designers be looking to implement it in their toolbox tomorrow?
Well, today I'm going to talk about the Shredder framework. I have invented it in, I think, 2019, but I am working on a refresh. And we're going to talk about this refresh for how it lives today in the world of AI. The framework is a framework in order to create a strategy. And in order to create a strategy, you need to be aware of your competitors and what they're doing. And the Shredder is essentially focused on picking up a competitor, shredding them to pieces, because in reality, in the internet, they are already shredded. You have different glimpses and pieces of information in different websites, articles, blogs, LinkedIn, etc. And the idea is to piece it all together like a crime scene and find the thread and try to understand their strategy and what their leverage points are, what their weakness points are, and utilize it for your own strategy and know how to prepare for the future.
Strategy is one of those things that's often so vague. So let's get into it. Tell us more. How do we get started with this?
Okay, so we will be detectives, but we will also be gardeners and biologists. And the reason is because the metaphor that surrounds the Shredder framework is the metaphor of a tree. If you think about it, we can think about a company like a tree. The truck is the strategy, essentially, but realistically, we cannot see into the trunk. We can instill a spy, but that would be illegal. And frankly, we cannot see the strategy. So what can we see? Well, we can see weirdly in this form, we can see the leaves, we can see the flowers, we can see the branches, and we'll talk in a second about what each one of those is. But we can also, to some extent, see some of the roots, especially if the tree is big. You can see the roots. Every company has multiple products that they're shipping. And they also have experiments and things that they try that don't necessarily succeed. So if you think of the branches, these are all the successful meetings, the rituals, the things that a company is doing that creates the leaves. And the leaves are essentially the experiments. And then from the leaves, after a period of time, you have flowers, which attract potential customers, right? These are like further experiments or beginnings of products. And then at the end, you have fruit, which people pick, people eat, people consume in one way or another. And the fruit is essentially the success of those products. It's how the company is essentially making money. Now, of course, multiple creatures can go and eat the fruit and multiple creatures live on the tree. You have pesticides, people who are basically feeding off the company and are not necessarily contributing to the company. And you have different parts of the ecosystem that are contributing, like bees who are fertilizing and kind of like making sure that more trees will grow in the same manner. Now, how can we look at that in practice? Because at the moment we only talked about the metaphor. In reality, we can look at a few things, and it's way easier to do it in the world of AI. Before the world of AI, we used to gather as a team for like a day, maybe 2 days, spending about 4 hours a day and coming up with all those methods of trying to scope and understand all the products that a company is producing. So if you think, for example, let's take Google as an example, they have so many branches and arms, and Alphabet is even more with Waymo and the variety of experiments that they're doing. But let's just take Google, for example. You have Gmail and Calendar and all the G Suite products, as well as like Ed Studios and AI Lab and Anti-Gravity. Like each one of those are products. And what we want to try to understand is based on their financial filing for the FCC and the earnings report, which one is bigger, which one is smaller, what are they willing to break down, what are they not willing to break down, because they might not show us everything. We don't know necessarily like how much money Gmail on its own does, but we know how much money the work suite is making. And it's up to us to try to understand what is happening in between. And it, of course, is related to us. If we are building a tool that is a productivity tool, let's say like Notion, that competes with the G Suite and is trying to understand what products should they build next and how should they compete and where can they be differentiated in comparison to Google, that would kind of like set the focus on that particular area and start going and try to understand that particular branch, all the leaps, all the experiments that were done. So they might go and try Gmail in different territories and in different languages and see the different experiments that are happening when they pretend themselves with a VPN in different places. They might go into the changelog and start reading the changelog and understand all the changes that were made to understand what the focus of the company, what other additions are they pushing right now, what other investments they're doing right now in this area. And looking at those decisions is not enough just to see like, hey, what have they done today? In order to understand the strategy, you can't just like settle for the flower at the end or the leaf at the end of the branch. You need to go deeper to understand the roots. So if you go and analyze the whole, and by the way, it's way easier today with AI. If you go down towards the trunk, the closer you get, you understand more the method of decision making. Why are they making those decisions? And you can only do that by looking at the history and consistently how they made decisions, what they prioritize, and when they prioritized it. Now, of course, a tree does not live in isolation. A tree lives in a certain weather, with certain conditions, etc. And these are the conditions of the market. These are other competitors. Maybe there's regulation that is affecting. It's like, to some extent, the reason why this thing is the weather is because it is essentially uncontrollable. You cannot tell what's going to happen. To some extent, you can lobby, you can, etc., etc. But if I am like OpenAI or Anthropic, I'm constantly trying to bring lobbying to try to essentially control the weather. Try to lobby to try to make sure that the rules will be in my favor. So when new competitors come, I can block them or I am prepared for it, because we all know that regulation at the end help the incumbent rather than the startup. Because if there are rules and things that you need to hit, well, it's way easier to hit it when you're like a big organization with thousands of employees and tons of money, versus now the bar to just get started got so higher that I need so much capital to just even start, then I can't start. And that's essentially why a lot of these companies are lobbying and are trying to do this thing. They're trying to solidify their areas and try to grow essentially their monopoly.
Very often when we think about competitors as designers, and I've done this in the past, of like looking at the product and just looking at the product and going, that's the competition. I'm going to study the way that they do onboarding and UX and things like that. But what you're saying is actually we need to understand the whole context of why these decisions were made, why that product looks and behaves and is marketed the way it is. And you really only understand that by going quite a bit deeper, and it will make your decision making more effective.
Right. So designers today, for example, especially product designers, would swear to God by Mobbin, right? Everyone goes to Mobbin, they look at screenshots, and they feel like we know how those products are working and we can mimic or take like the best cases of their UX or do a better UX. In reality, this is like completely superficial, because Mobbin, we have worked with Mobbin, for example. Like, I love the company. I think it's a really valuable resources, but it's not enough to try to understand strategy. At the end, when they work with you, they basically ask you for like a test user. They get a test users for the majority of those apps, especially if it's like a B2B app where they cannot just like do it themselves. And then you go and they just like, you give them some demo data so they can see and do the screenshots of everything, but it doesn't show the complexity of, in the case of Deel, for example, you have an organization with contractors in like 7 different countries and multiple immigration cases and devices that needs to be sent and like 3 people are onboarding, 1 person is on the way out because they're retiring, etc., etc. Like they cannot simulate all that complexity, and they essentially get like almost like an array of empty states plus a little bit of happy path, and that's about it. And that doesn't tell anyone about decision making. That could maybe a little bit hint at the design system, but not much more than that. We talked about like the top of the tree. We talked about the things that you see, but I want to talk slightly about the things that you don't see. And by the way, as a part of the things that you don't see, that you don't control, we can also think of fertilizing, which is essentially investors, right? And if it's a public company, then it's like public market investors. But if it's a startup that you're competing with, and again, like the times where I invented this framework was when I was working at iwoca. It's a Series D startup, biggest in Germany, second biggest here in the UK, but still in a very regulatory, hard to interact with users scenario. Like if you are working in a lending company, before you gave them the loan, they don't want to talk to you because they're afraid that you're not going to give them the loan. After you gave them the loan, they don't want to talk to you because they're worried that you're going to take the money. And if they are already in arrears, aka did not pay, well, they definitely do not want to talk to you because they think that you want to collect. So I was living in a world, and when you research your competitors in that, I had to actually like make my own business, which I had, but I had to start creating multiple bank accounts and start applying for loans, which impacted my credit score. But that was the only way for me. And again, like you don't have that stuff in Mobin, was the only way for me to try to see what's the experience in Funding Circle, what's the experience in Fleximize, and all those types of other products. So it does different. If you're going for like a more public, or if you're in more of a B2C world, you have more of those fruits available. But let's talk about the stuff that you don't have available right now. So the bottom of the tree, you have the roots. The roots essentially start from the leadership, the C-level, the founders of that company. Those guys usually weave and control the theme and how overall the culture and decision making is made in the business. Now that you have like websites like theorg.com, which basically helps you map the different org charts in different organizations, and you have people from those organizations who identify and privately share the org chart essentially with people. It's not always like true. It's not always like fully up to date, but it is a really, really good resource. Many times you say and you see, especially in events, let's say like WWDC or Google I/O and these types of events, you see when a company ships the org. You see that in navigation. You see that in disconnects between different products. You see how the product is structured, and very often it is mimicking the org chart. And that is why it's really important to go and look at this and try to correlate that, because that again means that you can understand where the company is going. That's why, for example, quite often you have these articles of this company is now hiring this type of role. So maybe they're expanding into Europe. They're suddenly hiring more in Europe. So following their career page, following their org chart really helps you understand where they're going and basically where they place their bets, right? Because where they place people, which is the highest cost of the business, is where they plan to make an investment. And if suddenly they bring in like credit analysts, then they're going to go into credit. Similarly to this, again, like recently you have all these articles of Meta trying to look for additional revenue sources, and now they're kind of like talking with Kelshi or Polymarket, trying to get into gambling and utilize all their audience for that.
So this might be like a leading indicator of where your competitors are about to go next. Checking out who they're recruiting for. Keep an eye on those LinkedIn careers pages for your competitors, because it might tell you what they're thinking about doing next.
In the past, you used to go, and it took a very, very long time, as you can imagine, when I invented it, to find out all those things. But now you have AI. You can have agents. You can have listeners that look across that. Now, sometimes social listening could also be very, very powerful, because you can look at Reddit forums. You can look at a bunch of other services and see what people are saying about the product. So you essentially have the audience identifying the gaps for you and telling you what they're not happy with. And these are opportunities for you to go in, double down, and try to.
So couple of things there, I guess. So it's like where this company is thinking about investing next, which might be a new area for them. But also you might have big competitors that you're like, they feel like they're going to be really hard to shake off this mountain. But actually maybe they've got some real weak points in there that your product, you could start over investing in strategically to try and beat them in certain areas. So you're using that to look for where they're going, but also what they've got already, maybe where they're particularly weak.
Exactly, because, at the end, like if you think of disruption theory, you get to a point where you might do something that it's very, very, very hard for those companies to do. So if you look at, again, ChatGPT, OpenAI, and Anthropic, they went into giving you an answer. Google, in the past, just gave you few answers, and those answers got enshittified over time because adverts appeared on top. But that was their business model, and it still is making shit tons of money. And so for them to come and give you a paragraph of text, unheard of. It's completely against their business model. But they saw that those companies are gaining so much attention and are disrupting them, that they had to go that way. But it took a very long time to go that way and to convince Google internally to go that way, because they are essentially cannibalizing their own business model. And that's where disruption theory hits, because ChatGPT and these guys realize that they have a thing that they do that Google will potentially never do, or by the time they do it, it's going to be relatively late, and they double down on that advantage. And that's why they are where they are, of course, with a lot of other aspects, right? But that's kind of like one of the pieces that help them get where they are today.
We can be the ones looking for those opportunities, but also going into not so much talking about the now as design, but going, this is where our competitors are falling down. This is where design could enhance this area.
I want to double down for a second more on some pieces that I didn't mention in the flowers. So in the world of flowers, it's not just products, right? It's a product, a flower, if you think about it in today's world, brings bees, brings a lot of animals that go interact with it and then go forward and spread the rumor. I forgot what it's called.
The pollen. Yeah.
The pollen,
yes. We love those guys. Save the bees.
Exactly. And they're very important for the ecosystem. These are not just customers, right? These could also be APIs. These could be partners. So don't think about it just in the form of customers, because a flower essentially it's like an open thing. It's like a reproduction organ of the tree, right? And so like it's calling anyone who wants to interact, and looking at the APIs, looking at the documentation, how easy they make it that you be able to build for them, and how much they invest in integrations. If you think about it, like how much Slack historically invested in integration, and that's why they have integration with almost anything. And it's like almost unbeatable, because that basically means that no matter what you need, no matter which company you are, it will work with your system. And that's what a company that is expanding and is in complete scale mode and trying to cater for enterprise look like. Now, the tree obviously is in the soil, and the soil is the TAM, is the total addressable market. The tree can create, like through the fruits, like smaller trees that are the same breed of tree. So smaller companies, sub companies, shell companies, sister companies, etc. But that's where you start like interacting with your competitors and stronger, more difficult. It's harder to grow in that territory, but that's essentially when you think of like TAM, this is your TAM. Now, I would say, as I'm thinking about it, some companies are more bushy than others. So some companies may not have exactly, and it depends on how the company is built, may not have exactly like a huge trunk that leads to lots of things. Some of them are more like a bush, but that as well could, as you know, if you have catered to a garden before, mint, for example, it's so invasive and takes over everything, and it creates these networks underground that is very, very hard to rip out if you haven't done it like early on, because it just stays there. It's kind of like The Last of Us. If you've watched that series, like a lady suddenly steps on like a branch somewhere and it wakes up like a bunch of zombies.
Right. I haven't seen it. I've heard of it, but yeah, not seen that. Love that image.
Yeah, you would not eat mushrooms after you watch that show ever again.
Something like mint or a weed that just kind of grows uncontrollably. It's always like it's out of control. Are these decisions about how they grow that companies are typically making consciously?
I think it really depends. If you look, for example, at Revolut it's trying to be a super app, but they have so many initiatives that has, at first sight, nothing to do really with Revolut and the core strategy or the core business of what Revolut is doing. But Nick is operating that company like a startup. So from his perspective, come every week or come every month or every quarter, depending on their cadence, and give me a bunch of ideas and we'll just try to do that. No one really needs a bank that gives you an eSIM. And yet, last time I've been to the US, I used the Revolut eSIM because I have Revolut and the experience is so comfortable and easy. They have a travel system and booking system for hotels. Has nothing to do really with fintech, for example. It's the same, like, so some companies are more strategic. If you look at Uber, they have everything is about transport. Scooters, buses, trains, helicopters, boats, whatever you can imagine. So they have a theme. But when you're in the world of money, if you take the hat of Revolut, well, anything that you buy can be that, right? They could expand into the territory of what Klarna is doing, which is essentially shopping, as an example, and it's still buy with Revolut. So it depends on like how generic the company is looking in it, but you can see evidently from the way Revolut operated that if you have great operations and you really invest in quality and you have that intensity from a founder like they have from Nick, you can go bushy and still grow. Now, I suspect that some of those businesses are making way less money than their FX or crypto or investing business. And it could be that at some point they will say, you know what, shop it. We don't need it, like Google does very, very often. They have many, many startups that they've killed and because they decided the business is not big enough, even though it made millions of dollars ARR. But I think in the case of Revolut, I think it depends on the founder and how much scattered they're willing to go with their strategy.
So if you're a designer who's trying to keep up with say you're working for Monzo and you're trying to keep up with what Revolut are doing, you would try and understand the behaviors of the leadership. And I guess the org structure, like you said earlier. So it sounds to me like Revolut is still very much an organization that is spearheaded by its founder. A lot of organizations are not like that, even if they're the same age as some company like Revolut. So you would start to appreciate this is what their leadership's like, this is what their decision making is like, and that actually they're quite likely to surprise us with the things that they do and the products that they launch. And you're maybe a little more prepared for the, I don't know, seemingly random things that are going into the product.
If I'm in Monzo, which, by the way, I think recently also introduced an eSIM. Guess why? It could be that some of those things are completely irrelevant for me. It could be that some of the things are cannibalizing me and are not allowing me to push on my own business model. And it could be that maybe the founder, like I know at Shopify, for example, at some point it feels like, I don't know exactly, but it feels like Toby said, I don't want a company bigger than 9,000 people. No matter what happens, I'm probably not going to have a company of 9,000 people. Again, this is my interpretation. He didn't say that practically, but that's what I feel. He was talking about the size of the company and what is comfortable and at what point it becomes so complex that it becomes slow that it starts becoming frustrating. And so you can say, okay, in that kind of world with AI, what can that company achieve if that's like a hard cap? And or alternatively, does AI shift and changes that in a way that maybe he will be able to have a bigger company because AI will optimize a lot of the things that have frustrated him. So all those changes in the weather would impact the tree and what is happening there. But I guess like maybe another way to look at it is if Revolut are making so much money, they have the power, maybe like anti-competitive power to some extent, to do a bunch of discounts. For example, they can say tomorrow, you know what, we're giving all the features that Monzo is giving for their account for free because we're making better money in Brazil or wherever it is. And they can do that for a period of time, take half of Monzo's customers and convert them to Revolut customers, and then bring it back to the way it was before.
So
they
if
can
I've been
hypothetically do something like that. So you need to always like be afraid of like someone who has like more money and someone who has so much diversity in their investment internationally that they can pull levers like this. And this is why it was very hard for some competitors to compete with Uber. But regardless of that, in some countries, you've had Didi, for example, in China, that basically probably was sponsored to some extent by the government and were able to bleed Uber so much that Uber were like, you know what, we're out. We're gonna buy a stake in Didi and we're gonna make money out of Didi, and we're gonna, through the stake, basically make Didi be more profitable, and we'll make money that way, and we'll exit in this crazy competition. And you can also look at what happened with, Getir, Gorillas, Zap, and all these like 10 minutes delivery services that you had here in London. They're all gone. They're all gone, literally. Deliveroo and Uber bots, Uber, I think like right now are buying Getir. And it was obvious, and it was really nice when we had it, and the price was very, very cheap, and you got everything in like 8 minutes, but very much like the Uber experience, it got shitified. Now you book an Uber and they're not there like in 2 minutes. Now they're there in like 10 minutes, and the car is meh, and a lot of other things, and the price is way higher, right? I guess to bring it again to the metaphor, if a tree can grow so big that, first of all, their roots are drinking all your water, aka in the metaphor, they're so big and so powerful that they can pay more money and they basically steal your employees, or your employees just want to work for them because they're more successful and they want to be more successful. And on the other side, they can control the weather because they get so big that they put a shade on you so you get less sun, so you cannot grow that much. And also, by the way, as a part of that, so they take your water, they take your sun, and by influencing regulatory, by getting bigger than you, and doing more marketing than you are, and you need to start expanding sideways, which basically pushes you to be more of a bush than a tree, and that could be problematic to some extent.
Historically, you have done this in a workshop, and I'm guessing this was stuff that was kind of on the walls, living stuff, like people are off doing the research and bringing it together. If someone's doing the shredder now, where does this stuff live? What kind of tools are they using?
Yeah, well, historically, when we did it, it was on Figma. So we had a Figma board, because also it's not like a designer only thing, because a lot of those trees, branches, fruits that you see and you're exploring is not just in the world of design. You want to see their marketing campaigns. You want to see their Google ads and pay-per-click ads. You want to see what they do in social media. You want to know what APIs they're sharing and with developers, and you want to know things that engineers will be able to examine, and product people will be able to examine, and ops people will be able. So it is a cross multidisciplinary workshop that you do there. And we did it in Figma because that was the best way for us to bring all these things together. And we even looked at things like how fast their website is, or what was the new versions, or where they stand on accessibility and things like that. Because even in accessibility, a lot of people got sued historically over time for that. So if your competitor gets sued, it's good for you to some extent. Again, so highlighting that they're not accessible, for example, no one's going to do that probably because they're not accessible themselves.
No.
If you were, then, it could be like some sort of advantage. And again, like also accessibility, it is really, really important. But when your market is very, very small, how much effort should you put into it? It's all a balance that you need to understand as a company. And it's all like a game of investment. So to do this thing in the world of AI, and I just like started scratching the surface there. I have like a really interesting Claude skills that basically takes all these pieces and starts, and I have like a list of websites and services and tools that you can go and examine. Now, some of those tools are more old school. You don't have MCP version and you would need to go manually and do a bunch of stuff there, or like have Claude browse and do this thing with an agent for you, which takes a very long time for Claude. And some of the things are less. And then we bring it again at this point of time. I don't think like AI is good enough at being collaborative. So we will bring it into Figma nowadays, but I am very, very, very much looking forward to OpenAI doubling down on their shared chat. And Claude already has, to some extent, these recently launched from last week, I believe, Claude agents that are living inside Slack. So you can kind of maybe get to something that can be called really collaborative with it, but I think there's a lot more work that needs to be done. It's not, for it to be digestible, you don't want to just go and be like a McKinsey, I'm going to go and produce like a full report for you. You want to make something that is also digestible and easy to understand. And I think that's another part of the shredder. Like it's very much like historical user research. People used to talk to lots of customers and make 50 slides with piles of text and quotes and whatnot, and no one would read it. Today, if you want to tell the story of the user, just have a conversation with them, chop 2 minutes into a TikTok-like thing and tell us what the customer said. Now, that gives you a lot of power in terms of storytelling, but it also gives you a lot of responsibility, because I can, by editing, and you would know that for sure, I can, by editing, completely make the person say whatever the hell I want them to say, really, because the editing is in the numbers. And you have that also, by the way, data scientists do the same way. Okay, so what was the cohort? Any one of those graphs that you see or user research that you see is an opinion of that person. And if you go and open up the bucket and see all the data that was there, you can tell a different story with the same data, whether it's like qualitative or quantitative. We talked a little bit about how to package it together. We didn't talk about the details of what is a part of it, but partially there needs to be a good understanding of what is a strategy, how to write a strategy, maybe try to understand the pillars of that company. Try, for the areas that you care about, map the customer needs, map the pain points, map the flows that they have and how they're solving that. So there's a lot of stuff that are deep inside the Shredder framework that basically dictates the output. And there is a big part of the framework that we didn't really dive into, but it is a bit more visual, and it's quite a lot of details that you need to cover there in order to get to the final distillation. So yeah, I think there's more to learn there, but I'm happy to probably take people through that in an actual workshop one day.
Yeah, maybe we need to have a live session at some point where we go through that in detail. What we are going to do is link to your articles about it, because I think this should have piqued everyone's interest of like going deeper into the methodology. What I will come back to then is kind of the why. Like, I totally get the power of a framework like this. And I think the fact that it's now accelerated with AI is great. But I guess there must have been a reason why you felt like you needed to develop this tool in the first place. So maybe you could talk a little about that, because it might be something that designers recognize, but maybe they weren't aware that they were missing out on strategy. And then maybe how you are getting your design teams to think differently off the back of using something like this. How do you encourage them to change their decision making, or how they think about design, how they interact with the business off the back of it?
I think it really matters where you are in the business. In terms of, if you look at your competitors, are you first in the market? Are you the leading in the market, or you're behind? Now, I think that this method is more useful for when you are behind. The reality is the majority of companies are behind some sort of leader. There's only one leader and everyone else is followers or, behind. So I think that this applies to the majority of it. I can tell you, when we were at Shopify, we felt that we were ahead. No one really cared about competitors or wanted to look into this. Now, of course, there were channels and there were people who were more interested, but it wasn't like full-on agenda from people to go and look at competitors and try to copy, because we were always first for anything from an innovation perspective, always. And I think that at Deel, we are probably, for the majority of the things, are probably always first as well. Now, there's other areas that if you are not first, or if you're like trying to create a new product, or maybe you have you are operating in an ecosystem where you're seeing something emerging. Let's look at, for example, Figma, for example, in this case. Figma made Figma Motion. Figma made Figma agents in the canvas that help you, but you had paper.design that did that, and you had Rive, and you had Lottie, and you had play.com that Apple just bought, and you also had Magic Path, and many, many other tools that have done everything that Figma did. And Figma basically took all those ideas and implemented them into their thing. And they wanted to enter a new place. They didn't really need to copy a strategy to their extent, and it wasn't destructive for their business model. So they just went ahead and did that, and now they are distributing it at scale. So if you're trying to build something that someone else has, it might be useful, or that you see them that gain huge amount of experience, you might do a shredder on them, try to understand their strategy, try to see if you can or should buy them, try to see if they're a real danger for you. And if they are, or if they're not, you will make the decision, am I acquiring this company, or am I going and trying to build it myself? A lot of the times, if you have a big company and you have so much talent, the decision is very easy to go and build it yourself. Sometimes, if, for example, let's look at X and SpaceX and their deal with Cursor. In that world, Cursor has so many clients. It's peanuts for Elon as well. The 60 billion, in comparison to the $1.5 trillion valuation that space, it's lunch. for him. And he essentially buys customers, and there's a lot of really interesting things in that deal as well. But I believe that that's kind of a framework that would help you decide if you acquire or do not acquire a competitor. And so for the design team, again, that's why I'm saying it's not just like for design, it's also like for product people, etc. Because this is one of the mechanisms for you to decide, hey, they're doing something really powerful and they have something that is going to take us so long to build that we need to acquire that thing or we need to do something similar.
What kind of transformation have you seen from teams that maybe not just using the shredder, but start to understand the strategy of other companies? How do meetings look different? How do products look different when you've actually got a good understanding of the strategy of your competitors?
Look, I think when you don't is very akin to talking to one customer and the customer complains or says something about a specific feature, and then you go and change that feature because that one customer said it. And then you realize after that by changing that feature, 200 other customers got hurt as a part of that because you did a research of one. And that is essentially what happens when you don't have a strategy. You go and you react to tactical decisions, even if they are maneuvers of other companies. Sometimes companies do maneuvers just to confuse the enemy, very much like in battle, right? Mm-hmm. Sometimes you show something and you make like a big story about it. Attention is going over there, but in the meantime, they're working on something else, and then they come up with this thing. And sometimes companies are just trying to poke at you or be deliberate in their communication to interrupt your communication. So for example, if you look at OpenAI, every time that Google announces an event, they make their event 2 days before or a day before, right? Because they want to control the media. They want it to be compared to them. They want to be in the conversation after Google release and ride on that wave. And they get to be mentioned in every article. And yesterday, GPT 5.5 came out and like, et cetera, et cetera. And that's also because, again, like this is again a tactic that they're ahead. They're kind of keep pushing and reminding people, hey, we're ahead of this thing. So discussions, when you have the strategy in mind and you know how a company operates, you don't get confused by sudden things. You're a bit less reactive to others and a bit more thoughtful about yourself because you know where you are differentiated to the competitor. And you know that if you double down on your differentiation, it's going to be very hard in relation to their strategy to interrupt with what you're trying to do. If you decided that, yes, this is like a thing that I want to do, or if you are someone who copies, and you have many companies that are copying, look at all the Chinese AI models that are distilling the American models and selling them for 1/7 of the price. They are distilling. They are okay with being 2-3 generations before because they know they offer it so cheap and probably not everyone needs Fable for everything that they do. And that's totally fine. 70% of the startups in the US are using Chinese models and not American models for the majority of their operations because it's way cheaper. It could be one day Trump will say, hey, you know what? You cannot use Chinese models. Can definitely happen. In that case, all the prices will go high even sooner than what we imagine that the prices will go high for all those companies. But I think it's a really good method of distilling a strategy and be able to follow and do things much faster because you have all those ears, you have the listening, you see what they're doing, and you're trying to be ahead of them. If you're like a low cost solution, that could be a very valid strategy even because you just continuously be a follower and you'd continuously undercut them on the price and you would continuously react. Think of all those case manufacturers for Apple. A case from Apple cost whatever, 70 pounds and all the other copycats from China or wherever cost way less. And the majority of the people buy them.
It's a legitimate strategy, right?
Legitimate strategy. The second Apple advertises their phone, they all go to the factories, boom, like lots of things, they ship everything and great.
Maybe I'm working at an organization where design just feels not quite as premium as all the companies I really like. But actually our strategy is to be the most cost effective, to have lean costs and operations and everything. Once I actually understand that, even like analyzing my own strategy within the context of the arena that I'm playing in, if I have a clearer picture of, okay, we're budget brands, we're about speed and operations and like leanness, I can stop thinking, I wish I was the premium one and go, okay, what can I do to strengthen the fact that we are leaner, cheaper with a budget brand. Like someone like Ryanair absolutely leans into that with everything they do now, right? So would you sometimes use the shredder on maybe even on your own business? Like if you're really not sure about what the strategy is within an organization?
Yep, definitely.
Yeah.
And Ryanair is a great example of, if you look at now United, and they did a deal with Starlink to make internet on the flight. Now everyone's rushing to make that type of internet, but not everyone wants to buy and pay, because now Elon is like, yeah, everyone wants my thing. So I think it was Verizon. Some of them have satellites, much fewer satellites, slower, less good tech. They're closing deals with them because they just want to provide and say, hey, we have this thing. Is it as good as Starlink? No. Would you know if it's as good as Starlink? No, if you don't fly United. That's totally cool.
Loved the practicality of this is how you can start to really understand a strategy and your place within the competitive arena, how to build that sense, how to use AI to help you build that sense, but then the why it matters, not just for designers, but for teams in general. We're going to link to articles that you've done on the shredder so that people can check that out as well. You mentioned your Claude skills. They sound incredibly valuable. This is stuff that used to take days, weeks, sometimes months to do. And now with good prompts, excellent skills, you can do it so much more quickly. I think you're going to have something available through your website sometime in August. Is that right?
100%. Yes.
Fantastic. What are some ways then people can keep up to date with you and keep an eye on when those things are coming out?
I'll talk about it in LinkedIn. So I'm trying to post almost every day on LinkedIn. It's not easy. But yeah, I'm trying to keep it interesting and trying to provide value. So hopefully I do.
You do. Absolutely do. So follow Avi on LinkedIn. We'll put a link to his LinkedIn in the description. Keep an eye on there for when those Claude skills become available, because they are going to be a game changer for you and hopefully your organization in a very competitive time for technology. Avi, thank you so much for being so generous with your knowledge and with the shredder of anything that helps designers and just teams in general understand strategy more clearly, because it's such a misunderstood and vague thing usually. So yeah, really appreciate you taking the time.